To present here. On behalf of Taj Bengal, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all. As you all are aware, an Authors Afternoon is an initiative of Prabhakitan Foundation in collaboration with Taj Bengal, and Shri Cement Limited is the presenter of this series. It's my honor and privilege to welcome the guest author of today, Ms. Sharbari Ahmed. Sharbari Zohra Ahmed was born in Dhaka. Her family moved to the US when she was 3 weeks old. She is a playwright and screenwriter and also writes fiction. She barely graduated high school but now teaches creative writing in the MFA program in Manhattan College and is artist in residence in Sacred Heart University's graduate film and television program. She lives in Durham in Connecticut. To be in conversation with her, we have our very own Esha Chatterjee, who is a literature enthusiast herself. So please enjoy yourself.
Everybody, welcome to another Authors Afternoon, and I've had the pleasure of chatting with Sharbari a while. I mean, we've been chatting for a while now, so without delaying, I'm just going to ask her to speak a little about, so we're going to talk about the book that she's recently published through Tranquil Bar Westland, Dust Under Her Feet, and she addresses Calcutta, specifically Calcutta, and its role during the World War II. So I'm going to quickly ask her to give us a little backdrop of why did she want to write the book, role of Calcutta, and the research that went behind it.
Firstly, it's such a pleasure to be in the city that the novelist said it, you know, and I'm a little nervous too, because I don't know if it holds up to muster for all the calcations, but well, a lot of it had to do with the fact that my mother was born here. She was born here and she had to leave immediately after partition. And it's just, I grew up hearing the stories of Calcutta and visiting too, but just the environment and always sort of spoke to me. And I had to come here and do a little bit of research. I came a while back, over a decade back, and I tried to sort of imbibe the city, you know, so I could create this story, and it was really, really magical and lovely.
So, when you're writing you're an insider, you were born here, but you moved to New York when you were just 3 weeks. So it was more of something that you've heard of growing up. You're a complete Bengali because your mother's from Chittagong and your father's from Sylhet, and you know Bengali so well, you speak Bengali so well, but at the same time you were an outsider, you were not living extensively here.
Right.
So when you were characterizing, how did you go about doing that? Did you think that it's important to be here, physically present, or how did you go about doing that? Could you?
You mean how did I create the characters?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you know, even though, you know, I was raised in the United States, I was actually born in Dhaka, and it was during, I'm going to be dating myself, but it was in 1971, and we had, you know, my parents were living in the States, but my mother insisted on coming back because it was becoming Bangladesh, and she wanted me born there. It was kind of a statement, in typical Bengali fashion, a political statement. But then we had to leave almost immediately because my father was on the Pakistani hit list, so we had to leave. So I don't know if I would have ended up staying or whatever. So we left a mere 3 weeks after I was born to flee, essentially, to the United States, and I landed up in Connecticut. But you know, so we were, even though we were the only Bengali family in this tiny little town of Chester, Connecticut, not only were we the only Bengali family, we were the only family of color. There were not even any African Americans in the town. My mother insisted on wearing saris everywhere. And so, but we were very involved with the Bangladeshi immigrant communities in more of the hubs, like in Boston and New York. And, you know, my parents were founding members of the Bangladesh Association of New England, BANE. And they used to put on, you know, Ekoshe February. they used to put on, you know, onushtans and shows and exhibitions. And so I was raised very much in the Bangladeshi immigrant community, you know, and so that's why it wasn't that hard for me to characterize. But, you know, these characters were an amalgam of all the people I knew and, you know, were familiar in a way.
So I have a mic now.
Yes.
So the lead character,
Yes.
Yasmine Khan,
Yeah.
and I think all the characters, even Radhika, Patience, it's an interesting name, very interesting name. They all are very strong-willed women, and if I may say so, that even the other books that you've written, they are women protagonists who are very strong-willed, and to an extent I've also felt that they belong to Islam. So is it, again, was it a conscious thing that you do when you're writing, when you're characterizing, that you want to put across a certain image?
I think, I mean, it's more subconscious probably, but I think that I am trying to subvert some stereotypes involving Muslim women and South Asian women. I think there's this notion that we're all very, you know, submissive and oppressed, and, you know, it's really not quite that simple. And Bengali women in particular are very opinionated and forward-thinking. And I mean, as we were discussing, you know, it was in Bengal that the Quit India movement really, you know, gained a foothold. I mean, Bengalis were agitating from the beginning to get the British out, you know, and they were very, very expressive about it. And in fact, it was a Bengali woman, Priti Lata, who led the uprising in Chittagong with Shurjashen. And, you know, so I think I come from a culture and a heritage of outspoken women, whether they're Muslim or
Yes,
Hindu.
the concept
it's Bengali women.
Yeah, so we were discussing that in Bangladesh. It's a very unique thing that they are Bengalis, I'd say we because I'm also an immigrant. My family is an immigrant. So we are Bengalis first and Muslims later. So if you know that incident that you were talking about, that the anti-Trump.
The anti-Trump rally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right before I came here, I attended my first anti-Trump rally, and it was in New York City. You know, we marched from Union Square, which is in downtown New York City, to Trump Towers, which is on 50th Street. We marched the whole time. We were yelling. We even got on the subway yelling and everything. It was a small group though, because in the U.S. right now, which is a separate issue altogether, people are in a bit of a state of shock over many of the things that are happening. And it was a small group, but even in this group of 30 or 40, there was 5 Bengalis. And they were leading the charge, Bengali American, but Bengali leading the charge against what we consider to be fascism and totalitarianism. And I don't think it's a coincidence, you know? So I feel like Bengalis are agitators. If they're not happy with the way the status quo is, they're going to challenge it at every turn. And honestly, that's as it should be.
So taking cue from that, I was just Yasmine Khan, you know, has dialogues which, when you read it, if you're a Bengali, you would understand that it's really Bengalis speaking. So you know, what was your process of writing it? Because there are certain things that you've touched upon this book, like the Calcutta's role, the setup of the Americans as a base to stop the Japanese, about the bombings that happened in Calcutta, which is not so known to a lot of us. So all of it. When you were writing, why did you choose to write about this city? Why did you choose writing about World War II as a backdrop?
Well, I mean, like I said, my mother's stories really sort of inspired me. But also, I think ultimately this novel, in a strange way, even though it's set in a time that's far removed from my generation or my time, is an intersection, rather, not an amalgam, of both my American and my Bengali identities. So, you know, I grew up in the United States, and I grew up watching these incredible movies, you know, black and white movies from the golden age of Hollywood, and I loved them. But in the same token, I would see these movies and say, there's nobody there that looks like me. They're not getting my Bengali stories right. You know, like, you know, they made Jungle Book, the live action version of the Jungle Book, which was made in the 40s, is horrible. It's so racist and strange, and you know, in Hollywood we'd get a lot of things wrong, you know. But I still love those movies. They were quintessentially American. and set during World War II. And then then I had my Bengali identity, and I felt like Hollywood and Bengal are both epicenters of great storytelling. So how do I bring these two things together, So the book is a result of that. And so Kolkata seemed like the logical choice because as I did the research, I realized something incredible. There was a huge American military presence in Kolkata before, they were shipping off to Burma to fight, and they used Kolkata as sort of their wave station, their first foray into battle. And the British were very uncomfortable with this, They needed the Americans, but the Americans came and essentially took over, and which I found fascinating.
There's also a little bit of discomfort among the people of Bengal because they know the English speakers as a certain way, and then they see Americans who are way more cool and chilled out. I mean, that's what...
Well, the Americans are cooled and chilled out, but as Yasmine observed, maybe they were more accessible than the British people, the British whites, but she noticed that the Americans were segregating their African American soldiers, and they were treating their Jewish soldiers with a certain level of contempt and suspicion. So there's a hypocrisy there that feeds into Yasmine's notion of how absurd colonialism is to begin with, and racism is.
And when you're talking about a girl who's 16 years old and Radhika, and she's, she reads a lot, and she identifies herself with somebody who's protesting. I mean, how did
she actually doesn't read. She's illiterate because she's Shudra,
But then she's
politically active because she's Bengali. She's looking around and she's observing, and she's seeing that because I think when the book opens, it's 1941, and the British were very paranoid because Bengal was, Netaji and everybody they were really pushing to get the Brits out, and the British were very insecure, so they were tamping down on anyone they considered to be, speaking traitorously. So Yasmine was worried that Radhika was going to get in trouble and get everybody in the nightclub in trouble.
So, I mean, you can also touch upon the role of, a little bit, that when you were researching, you saw the role of these women in the freedom fighting, and also the fact that as a Bengali, I've always felt that I've heard a lot of stories, I've read a lot of stories in Bangla, which talks of partition on this side, on the east side of India, but internationally, I think partition is primarily Punjab.
Yes.
English literature has always kind of focused more on the Punjab and Pakistan, and they've not really...
Even movies focus mostly on the Punjabi notion.
Yes, and also I think nobody really focused on the fact that Bangladesh was partitioned twice. I mean, it became 3 countries in a span of 30 years maybe.
That's right, right. It's extraordinary. So I mean, this is the thing, and we were discussing this, and it's something that I want to explore, but I haven't figured out how just yet. But I've often wondered if East Bengal had been given the choice to go with Pakistan or India, what they would have done. Nobody asked us. We woke up. My ancestors woke up on the morning of August 15th, and they were told, "You are now East Pakistan." And because we identified so much with being Bengali, not Muslim. I wonder how that would have gone over. I think if that referendum had been put to us, I actually theorize that we wouldn't have gone with Pakistan. It didn't make any sense culturally or intellectually or even spiritually. Strangely enough, it didn't make any sense because their form of Islam is quite different from our notion of Islam. Yeah.
And because you're also into script writing, and you're into natok, Broadways. How different is it to write a book from a script?
Screenwriting is much more visual. It's a much more visual medium. So you have to tell the story with the camera. You have to use the camera to tell the story. So you can't rely as heavily on dialogue and so on. And so and you can't spend as much time necessarily unfolding a story or unpacking an emotion. It has to be communicated through a gesture or a look or a one line. Whereas in a novel, you can languidly spend time talking about how Yasmine is emotional, her internal, engine is going. But in a film, you can't do that. You have to show it. You have a limited amount of time. You've got 90 minutes to 120 minutes to sort of tell the story.
So when you're developing a character, it's very different. How you...
Well, the development process isn't, in terms of developing a character, isn't different. There's a lot of things about Yasmine and the other characters in the novel, their backstory that didn't make it into the novel. It was there as a foundation for me to sort of build whole characters who are nuanced and multidimensional, And film is the same way. I mean, there's so many script writers and directors will tell you, oh my God, this character was, had all these proclivities and habits and idiosyncrasies that never made it into the actual story that we ended up seeing because for the service of time, and also it's not necessary to do anything.
So do you think that writing a book helps you get into script, or is it the other way around?
For me, it's definitely, so I always wanted this to be a film, but I thought this is quite a sprawling story, so I really need to focus on the characters and the historical aspect of it, really work this out so I can create a full picture even before I decide to write a script. So yeah, writing this will definitely help, and I'm adapting it now into a screenplay. So definitely it helped, yeah.
And you're the first Bangladeshi American writer to be enlisted
for network television.
For the
Yes.
network television.
Yeah.
Which is
Yes.
huge.
Yeah, it is. It's a big deal. And on top of that, I'm a female, which is, which is a big deal. So, yeah.
So one more thing that I wanted to ask you was about, you were discussing this, I was just refer to the,
Sure.
yeah. So, about the Liberation War, about the backstory that we were discussing, if we could also speak a little bit about...
You mean 1971?
In the 1971, the Ekushe
February. Yeah,
thing,
that was
Bhasha Andolon,
Yeah.
which...
What would you like to know? What would you like to talk about?
So we were talking about this, that when you're talking about a time like a World War II, a lot of times what happens is that you're bringing in a subject which is interesting to only a group of people. But but it's a fiction at the end of the day, and there's also a beautiful love story in this book, which has its own curve, which goes up and down. So, when you were writing it, were you conscious about the fact that putting this love story in this kind of a background, I mean, would that put some of the readers away, or was it more about talking about World War II and then having the love story, and like that's something that I wanted to.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what your question is, but
the question is that did you think of the love story first and then the World War II, or were you thinking of putting in World War II and the role of Calcutta and the love story?
I think it all was simultaneous.
Okay.
I just started thinking about this person, Yasmine, and she showed up unbidden one day and she said, I have a story and you're the one I want to tell the story. So, yeah, I mean, she's independent, she's a courtesan's daughter. She's not a courtesan herself. And so but being a courtesan's daughter means that she's not going to get married and have this respectable sort of traditional life or trajectory as an Indian woman. So she, in my head, is like she's opening this nightclub to mainly as a means of livelihood, right? But she's a businesswoman. She sees all these American military personnel pouring into the city. How does she make money out of this? So she opens this nightclub, and so naturally she's going to meet American men. And so I thought it would be interesting to see if she engaged in something, a relationship with one.
You said that you were saying that you want to talk more about the process of, a story coming to you, and how
the mystical. The mystical. Well, Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet, talks about the mystical aspect of being a storyteller and how these voices show up and start talking to you, and it's scary, but it's exhilarating as well. Or how you're just walking down the street and you'll smell something and it'll trigger a memory or an idea or a thought, or you'll hear a piece of music and it'll evoke an emotion in you that you want to explore as a writer and storyteller. So that's kind of what happened with Yasmine. I think, of course, growing up listening to my mother talk about Kolkata during that time, and just how Bengal was just so alive with agitation, political agitation. It was interesting to me.
Is there any favorite part of the book, any passage that you loved writing the most? Was it any part of the story that you loved the most?
Well, it is a love story a traditional love story between a man and a woman, but there's also a second love story, and it's more about the sisterhood of women. And all these women, were working in this nightclub, Bombay Duck, and it's their sort of relationships, particularly the relationship between Anglo-Indian patients, Goodwin and Yasmine, who both grew up in the same Haveli, both their parents were courtesans, and Patience and Yasmine's relationship to me was one of my most fun parts of writing. Just this, because friendships between women are very complex, and I think people don't quite understand that, but it's also astonishing what happens when a group of women get together and decide to be united. They're invincible, and probably disconcerting to men.
There's a thing about Bombay Duck. Would you like to say what your Bombay Duck means?
So Bombay Duck is, because my mother's from Chittagong, and I made Yasmine's character hail, part of her ancestry hail from Chittagong. Bombay Duck is loita shutki, which is this Chittagonian delicacy. It's a very stinky fish, but very tasty. And I think Yasmine, in her typical kind of contrarian mind, thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to name something, to name my nightclub that, and then people will ask about it, and I'll say, it's actually a fish.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, the backstory of the loita mat, the loita shutki. So, would you like to read a few passages from the book?
Okay. I didn't know I was reading, but here, okay. I'll just read
maybe the part that the parts that you were discussing about Rahul and
Well, actually, you know what? I'm gonna read the first part. Okay, maybe I'll read. Okay, so every night the women would have to perform, and it was almost like going into battle, because they had to get up, they had to be on, they had to, and Yasmine was always encouraging the girls to make sure that a lot of liquor was sold, and they weren't prostitutes, which is something that Yasmine was constantly saying, and in fact the girls were not. It wasn't about that. It was more about flirting and performing, but there was rituals, so prior to performing, they would all get together and have dinner together. And so the girls of Bombay Duck arose by noon, washed and hung their precious few silk stockings to dry, hummed and smoked and gave one another massages. Yasmine, the owner and boss, was awake well before. She needed the silence. Once everyone was up, they would all be tugging on her. Sometimes she loathed the sound of her own name. It usually meant there was something that needed sorting out. She did enjoy hearing the girls trade stories about the previous night's events. Who had to fend off that lecherous adjutant from Pinner, whose rancorous wife had come along to keep an eye on her husband and glare at Patience, the main singer, the prettiest one, who got the low tipper, who felt they sang off-key. At 5 p.m. sharp, the performers and the staff all took their meal together in the main room, which was cleared early in the morning, aired of the stale smoke, sweat, and liquor, tables pushed to the side, chairs neatly stacked, floors swept and bar wiped down. The cleaning staff grumbled that the room would once again be smelly and in disarray in a few hours, so why did Yasmine insist that every nook and cranny be swept? Yasmine believed that the club came alive every night, as if for the very first time. It was reborn, with new energy, new patrons, and new stories. No two nights were the same, and it required a blank slate. She also insisted that the evening meal before the doors opened was taken together, so everyone could sit down and listen to one another. She felt creating a hierarchy of caste and religion would only cause problems for her later. At the Duck, she said to everyone individually their first day, there was no India as they knew it and that in fact this was not India. Yes, Patience, her closest confidant and oldest friend would quip, you have entered Yasministan, where there is no caste, no god is held higher above than any other, the sexes are equal, but the rupee above all reigns supreme. Yasmine made sure that the lighter-skinned girls were not treated better, nor were the men, such as Pharaoh and his bandmates, or the cook-cum-manager Adil Babu, considered superior to the women. This sat well with everyone. The youngest performer, Radhika, was a 16-year-old Dalit. Madhu, another one of the performers, was a strict vegetarian and possibly a Brahmin, though she never talked about it, but did not object to eating next to anyone consuming meat and did not insist her food be prepared separately. The one exception was Asma, the Parsi. She was educated and persnickety by nature. She held herself above everyone at the Duck, even Yasmine. One got the impression she would find fault with King George's table manners if she were dining with him. At Yasmine's table, Muslims broke bread with Hindus, a Reformed Catholic, and at least one agnostic, Yasmine herself. On the outside, beyond the Duck's doors, where Calcutta sweltered and grew increasingly restless, this would not be possible. Yasmine arbitrated who performed on stage first to last, but when it came to meals, even the lowliest peon who cleaned the water closet, took the laundry down to the dhobi ghats and ran errands, was served the same food and the same amount, though they ate after serving the girls in the band. It was not that Yasmine was making a political or social point. It was that it was impractical to be divisive. It was bad for business. She did not believe in dividing and conquering, though, as she and everyone around her would find out a few years later, the British most certainly did.
You know, we've spoken of, we were talking about how Bengal had no division by religion. There was no caste really before the partition happened.
Yeah.
So did that come in when you were researching?
Yeah, I mean, I found out so much about Kolkata. So the thing is, I think that Kolkata and her inhabitants, at least among the British, have this reputation of being effete and kind of too cerebral and intellectual to be, stalwart. But meanwhile, Calcutta proved how tough they were when the Japanese bombed. The Japanese started bombing relentlessly, and Calcutta rose to the occasion. And even the British were shocked. And they declared it. Even the governor, I forget his name, declared it in the newspaper that Kolkata met the challenge. They kept calm and carried on. And the residents of Kolkata were like, of course, we're not going to cower. We're not even cowering in the face of the Raj. Why would we cower to some Japanese bombs? It was Caucasians were so practical, and they managed. They didn't allow the fear to take hold, which is why when Direct Action Day happened in 1946, it was very, very unfortunate, the horrendous communal violence that occurred.
And when you were researching, did any of the real incidents feature?
Well, actually, the real incident that really was one of the motivating factors for writing this novel is something my mother herself witnessed. She was 6 years old and she was living in the Muslim quarter, and I forget exactly where, and from her veranda, she witnessed a Hindu boy being murdered by a Muslim mob. It stayed with her, my grandfather tried to intervene, it was dangerous, and then later on, of course, they found out that some of their Muslim friends were killed by a Hindu mob. It was just horrendous, and I think for her little girl sensibilities, her world was falling apart. People she considered to be friends and neighbors were now enemies and viewed her as an enemy. So it was shocking how that took hold. But it was outsiders who came in and did this to Kolkata. It wasn't Kolkata or the residents of Kolkata themselves,
And do you think that Yasmine Khan, if she came back in today's time, would be proud about the fact that they fought so much for world peace?
Yeah.
Do you think?
What do you mean? Because nothing has changed. I think that she wouldn't be proud at all. I think that no one has learned much. People are still divisive along caste lines, along religious lines. The United States is falling apart socially. So I'm not sure she would be proud, no.
So do we open up for questions?
It's up to you. You still have time to. If you don't left with any questions.
Another 15 minutes after 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So I wanted you to talk a little more, ask you a little more about your journey to the script writing and being in America, being from Bangladesh, being in America, getting into board, writing about it. Because when I was talking to her, I asked her about this. Like, do you think that you were only asked to come to Quantico because there was an ethnic character, there was a colored woman out there? Do you think that that's when somebody like us is called for to get it more authenticated, or would you ever be asked as an American to talk about America?
That's a really great question, and this is part of the conundrum of being a minority writer in Hollywood. I think I was definitely brought in because Priyanka Chopra was the star of Quantico, and they wanted a South Asian writer. But what they didn't realize was that I was also of Muslim heritage, because they had these two Muslim characters as well. So they were like, oh wow, we got two for the price of one, which shows also their lack of understanding that there are actually Muslims in South Asia, that it's not just the Middle East and Arabs, So it's strange, but I think, to be very honest with you, absolutely. I think, Priyanka was an untested, in Hollywood she was completely untested. She might have been huge here, but nobody knew who she was in Hollywood, and they didn't know if she was going to be able to garner support or generate revenue, because Hollywood, at the end of the day, the bottom line is money. And if she was going to be able to generate that kind of interest and so on financially and otherwise. And so, yeah, they brought me in, but I think that now that I've done this and I'm part of the union and I'm getting other opportunities, I think I'll get both. I'll get people asking me to come in and write, the ethnic story. And also, people will also approach me, I've been approached to write because I'm American,
From the American perspective.
Yes.
So does it give an opportunity for you to explore more about India and Bangladesh? Like, do you think that there'll be more representation of India and Bangladesh, more authentic representation through your eyes or when you're characterizing?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, I would attempt to do things in an authentic way. I can only go by my experience, and it is a Bengali experience. So, yeah, definitely.
And if you would like to talk a little bit more about the natos that you were talking about, like the Broadway shows that you're scripting and.
Okay. It's not Broadway, it's off Broadway. I wrote a play called Raisins Not Virgins, and it's going to be produced off Broadway in New York in June of 2020. And it's the only play I've ever written. Playwriting is not my most favorite medium, but yeah, it's being produced now in New York.
Okay, so I think we've been talking a lot about the book, and I didn't want to get in depth into the characters of the book and everything else, because I don't know how many of you all have read the book. So if there are any questions regarding all things we discussed, anything you want to ask, then we'll open it up.
Yes. Any questions? Yes. Can you give her a microphone?
Well, it's a small one, but maybe.
So I really liked what you spoke, and what I really liked about the conversation was like the research and the depth you had for your character. But my question is slightly different. Like, for people who are aspiring to write,
Yes.
how did your journey begin, and did you always know that you wanted to take this route, or was there something else that got you here?
That's a great question. I'm lucky in the sense that I've known from a very young age that I wanted to be a writer. And being Bengali, that's encouraged, that's not a bad thing, So when I told my parents I want to be a writer, they were like, great, but you have to get your master's, They're still Deshi parents at the end of the day. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer, so I did pursue that. I got my MFA in creative writing from New York University. I really put a lot of, I pursued it in the face of tremendous rejection. And and challenge, and living in the United States where, they're not very familiar with writers like me. Though, Jhumpa Lahiri is very celebrated in the United States, but, I think there's this notion of, oh, we've checked off that box. We have our South Asian female terrific writer. We don't need others, So my journey has been very circuitous and arduous, but it did start from when I was a child. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So this notion of whose stories are we allowed to tell?
Yes.
That's really big now. So how do you circumvent that world, as it were?
you know, I'm going to be very blunt and say that white men are allowed to write about everybody, and the rest of us are not. And, you know, and in fact, when I was writing this and I was trying to sell it, people were you know, rejecting it. Someone said to me, why don't you take on a pseudonym of a white guy? Not a woman, a white male, and it'll get published probably. And it doesn't matter that it's about women. So I mean, it's a challenge, honestly. You know, when I first started out and I would submit my manuscript or submit stories, agents would say to me, can you write more like Jhumpa Lahiri? Can you write more like Arundhati Roy? You know, because those were the known tested quantities that proved successful. And Arundhati Roy herself talks about it, like having to pander to the Western audience, the white gaze, you know. It's very much a challenge. A lot of us, I mean, in my community of South Asian American writers are facing it, you know. That's why I'm very gratified to have been published in India first, because my book is getting the you know, respect and attention that I like, you know, even though this is so American as well, my voice is very American as well because I'm both and there's American characters. For some reason, it's because it's such an unknown, oh, Calcutta, where is that? And it's not Bombay, it's not, you know, and, you know, that's why it's better that it was published here first. And I just keep writing, you know. I face a lot of challenges though. If I try to write a character who's not South Asian and female, I get a lot of pushback from the publishing establishment in the United States. But I don't care, I'm just gonna write whatever I want. They can catch up to me.
I'll add a little bit about this, that when I feel like Arundhati Roy now, you know, she kind of formulates the stories and she characterizes them in a sense that it's acceptable on a in an international basis. Like she writes about characters people want to read more about. But when you're reading this book, especially, I was telling her that if you're a Bengali, you can literally hear somebody speak in Bangla, although you're reading English, and also that the characters are really real, like the things that they speak about, their concerns, and they are not stereotypical at all. Like there's not.
That's really important because what I found is amongst the South Asian American writing community, not just Bengalis, but from all over South Asia, there are some writers who really do pander to the exoticism because they need to get published, and that's something that causes irritation, you know? Like, you don't know how many times people have asked me to write about arranged marriages. I don't know anything about arranged marriages. I didn't have one, and my parents didn't even have one. They dated. We don't know anything about arranged marriages in my family. I'm not qualified to write about that, you know? But they just look at me and assume, oh, are you having cross-cultural agitation? Are you uncomfortable being American and Bengali? And I'm like, no, the two are not mutually exclusive.
Someone said that if you're South Asian or if you're Indian, then just have the term curry in your book.
Turmeric.
Turmeric, curry,
spices, yoga, lotus.
Yeah, it can be any restaurant, just name it yoga.
Yeah. I always joke, the mistress of the guava orchard. You have to have titles like that, and you have to have mango in the title, right? Or at least on the cover. It's nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah.
But this is
and that's the reason why I was trying to poke her into. When you were discussing, she was actually saying a lot of stories, so I was really trying to poke her to say those, a lot of backstory that we were discussing about the characterizations. So that's what I was telling you, that when the characters are really interesting, and if somebody leave apart the romance as well as the backdrop of the World War II, the characters are something, they're so in depth through their conversations that this is such an interesting read, just because the characters remain, especially of the women.
Well, courtesans were very, very independent women. And they, there was a question, somebody else had a question, yes.
You're a writer for the screen as well, so when you're writing a screen, on the screen, as you said, that you can't go into a long narrative of how a character is feeling. So on the screenplay, what is your creative writing process, or what is your writing process, so that you can craft a scene that effectively delivers an emotionally challenging scene, or delivers a message that has to be effectively delivered in one scene or through a gesture or something?
So the thing is, one of the things that TV writing taught me was to outline. You have to outline everything. You have to, and so the thing with screenplays is what I do is, even if it's a television pilot or just a feature film, I really just break it down. First step first is I break it down to its bare bones, you know, scene by scene, and try to communicate what each scene is meant to do. So everything you write is meant really for one purpose, which is to push the narrative forward. So character reveal, plot reveal, action is just in service of pushing the narrative forward. That's it. So if you keep that in mind, then it's easy to, not easy, but it makes it clearer to write the screenplay. Same goes for fiction, but with screenplay, you know, there has to be an economy of narration, you know, and it has to be visual. So you really, it helps to break it down into its bare bones and say, okay, what is this scene trying to communicate? And does it push the narrative forward? These are the two questions you ask.
What about Quantico?
Yes.
So my girls are both in the US,
Yeah.
and I think it changed a lot for
Yes.
the people who suddenly had, the Americans who suddenly knew about Priyanka
Yes.
and where Priyanka shot up, and how was Quantico, how did you sort of figure out what you wanted to write? Did you have Priyanka in mind? Did you have,
Right.
how did this whole journey?
Well, I was one of a team of writers, and I
Right.
wasn't the creator of the show.
Okay.
That was somebody else, and he was the showrunner, and he created the show. He created the schematic, which is this terrorist attack, you know, and the Grand Central Station, which is the main terminal in New York City, was blown up by a terrorist who was an FBI agent. And when you start off, you think it's Priyanka Chopra's character, Alex Parrish, and she has to spend the entire series running from the FBI and the law, and also having to prove her innocence and find out who the actual terrorist was. So that was the overall plot. So that was already set when I came in. I do not think that this series, as far as I know, was written for Priyanka. It was written for a strong female character, and Priyanka was in contention along with many other actresses, and she got the role. And as a result, we had to adjust a few things, you know, because she wasn't just, you know, she wasn't American Indian, she was from India, you know. Yeah. And it was an extraordinary thing, her coming in and doing that. It was unprecedented.
So was the role written for a person of ethnic background, or
I don't think
that was
so.
fine? Okay.
I don't think so, no.
Thank you for your question. Thank you, ma'am. I just wanted to ask, like, when a writer is writing, like big writers who are beginners, they don't know that their content is good or not. So how do you get that confidence, that drive to be sure about what you're writing is good or not?
I'm still not sure. Are you kidding? You know, I mean, I've had people criticize the book and make me feel like, oh, did I do something wrong? And it's published. No, I think part of being a writer is you're going to have to get very comfortable with the self-loathing and the lack of confidence. It's when you get too confident is when the artistry flies out the window. You have to be a little humble, you know? Arrogance will destroy your creativity, I think. No, confidence comes and goes. Sometimes I feel very confident. There's certain things I do feel confident about now because I've been at it for a long time. And I understand the craft of writing. And that took a while, you know? Writing like anything is storytelling like anything is a skill. You can have some base talent, but it does require discipline and attention and so on. But yeah, you're going to have people tell you you're a genius, and then you're going to have somebody else tell you you're rubbish. So you have to figure out who you're going to take seriously, you know?
Yes. Like, so you're talking about screenplay writing as such. Ma'am, whenever you're into writing, say the screenplay of a movie or like a web series, like you were there in Quantico, there are a lot of co-writers that you have along with you.
It's much more collaborative.
Right.
Yeah.
So how does like an individual as a writer contribute to that particular screenplay, or how do you come into consensus that what should be there essentially in the
Well,
script?
for TV shows, essentially it's up to the showrunner to decide whether or not, you know, he or she's going to go ahead with the ideas you generated that day or that week. So consensus is, you know, you're in a room with a bunch of other writers and you come up with what you consider to be a viable arc for an episode, and then, you know, you might all go, this is great, let's take it to the boss, and then she'll go, no, it's lousy, go back. So we have to, and that's happened. So we go back and we structure it. So yeah, it's a very, TV writing is very collaborative. Filmmaking is also very collaborative. So the screenwriter can write the feature by him or herself alone, but then once that goes to the director, the other people in production, then it changes, you know, and becomes a collaboration. Any other questions?
Any questions? Maybe I have one last
Okay,
question to
sure.
ask. And I would ask that about the dialect. When you're growing up in America, the English is so different from the language that you've used in the book. That's English, or also the fact that in Bangla there's a lot of different dialects that people use. Every person from a different background has a different way of speaking Bangla.
Yeah.
So was that a difficulty when you were writing the book? I mean, how did you get the voices correct?
Well, not really. I mean, I wrote it so it's in English, you know. I just thought about the Americans, how they spoke, because the Americans spoke markedly differently than the British did. That was easy enough. I mean, I have a sense of how the British speak and how the Americans speak. In terms of the Bengali dialects, I didn't really go into that, you know, because it wasn't primarily in English, so I had Yasmine talk about a few words here and there. There's certain Bengali words that defy translation, like alladhi and nakami and dhong. So she had to describe the difference between nakami and dhong to her American boyfriend, and she found herself also puzzled. Like, how do I explain that? But, you know, other than that, I didn't really go into Bengali dialect too much, no.
Okay, so there's one.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
Like you work for a TV show, American TV series, like a lot of people my age, we are into British and American TV series. Right now the scene in India is that we don't watch a lot of Indian TV, so do you have any plans for Indian television?
I would love to work for, one of my friends he's running the second season of Delhi Story, you know, he's running the second season for that, and I think he's already done his room, so I don't think. But I would love to. I mean, another one of my friends was in Sacred Games. Rajshri Deshpande. She was Nawazudin Siddiqui's wife in Sacred Games, and I thought Sacred Games, you know, with its problems, was structurally and storytelling wise, you know, a good step. I saw Made in Heaven, which I thought was, you know, good fun. You know, I didn't think it was anything that deep or substantive, but it was good. It was good quality entertainment. You know, and that was very well made. So yeah, I would love to. I think it's open season right now in India for television. I think India is hungering for content, but content where the script is taken into account, like storytelling is taken. I think Bengalis would always want a good story. You know, the rest of India, I don't know, but Bengalis want a good story.
I love it. Keep saying Bengalis. We
Yeah.
were discussing this. For us, Bengalis, and there are two divisions. There are two classes of people. One is the Bengalis and one is the
non-Bengalis.
Also the non-Bengalis.
So I mean, but Bengalis do love a good story, and it is important. I mean, if you, it's a Bengali, you'll say, the story, it was fun, the story was no good. It's a Bengalis say things like that. But I think India right now as a whole is really looking for content and storytelling, and they might have to tear a page off from Hollywood's rule book a little bit in terms of, because Hollywood is very strict about structure and scripts, and you know, screenwriters are, you know, respected and taken seriously, and I think Bollywood isn't always known for the script, right? It's, you know, so that, I think that's changing a little bit. I hope so.
If I may ask you that when you're writing a script, because I was recently talking to somebody who's into script writing, and he said that, you know, Sacred Games, the first season was more about the drama and the ups and downs and climaxing, and the next season they got very involved with the storytelling. So when you're doing a series or a film, you can't get very involved with the in-depth storytelling of things. You just need to be, like, you know, floating there, and you need to have more ups and downs and be more dramatic than, you know, having a prolonged conversation between two people. So does that affect you when you're, you know, writing down a script?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I'm not sure what your question is. I mean,
So
yeah,
it can't be very self-involved. It has to be more engaging and interactive with the viewers.
Well, the Sacred Games, I think an expectation was set up, right? That it's going to be a mix of action and drama. So if you decide to suddenly second season change that, audience is not going to respond to it because they have an expectation of setup. Sacred Games, like for instance, if Sacred Games suddenly becomes about like a romantic comedy, people are going to be like, what just happened here? This is not going to work. So you can't, do that probably. So you do have to, when you're writing a TV series that's prolonged for several seasons, you do have to keep in mind the tone of it, and you can't suddenly switch. No, you're absolutely right. Yes.
Hope you all had a good time. I thank author Sharbari Ahmed for giving such delightful insights of the book and Esha Chatterjee for conducting such a wonderful conversation. I take this opportunity to thank Prabhakhetan Foundation and Shri Cement Limited for continuously organizing boutique literary events in association with Taj Bengal. I would now request Nirmal Brahmachari, the eminent author from Norway, to come and give the memento as a mark of appreciation to both Ms. Sharbari Ahmed and Esha Chatterjee. And I would like to add that he has written about 100 books, out of which about 89 in the Norwegian language. And he's even converted the Ramayana and Mahabharata in the Norwegian language.
Oh, thank you so much.